Welcome to today's Inspiration Wednesday. Today's topic, we are going to be focusing on all of the changes that we've made to actions in version 11. My name is Tara. I am the Director of Training here at Trivantis. So happy all of you could join us this morning. So let's dive in and talk about actions in Lectora. Now, as most of you know, Lectora version 11 has recently been released. This is the latest version of Lectora that we're working with. So the focus of our session is not necessarily going to be on each and every action in Lectora, how they all work, etc., but rather it's going to show you the ways that actions have been improved with version 11. We've made a lot of changes to actions so that they're easier to work with, and you can more quickly create that interactive and engaging content that you can within Lectora. So let's dive in, and let's first start with just a very basic overview of what actions are. We've kept the functionality of actions the same in the sense that they're still broken up into those three components. There are still three components that will make up any action you build within your content. Now, if you take a look at my screenshot here, first and foremost, you can insert actions from this insert ribbon. Now, as you've been playing with version 11, you've probably noticed that we've made it a lot easier to add actions in the sense that you don't always just have to come to this insert ribbon. You may have noticed that when you work with additional objects, you'll see if an action can be applied to that object, you can add it while working with that object. So you don't always have to come to this insert ribbon, but this is the main place you can come to insert an action into your title. Now, as I mentioned, each action is comprised of three main pieces. You have your on section of the action, and you can see down at the bottom of this page, you can see I have a screenshot of what that new action ribbon looks like. Your on selection, or your trigger, this is going to specify when you want the event to fire. Should this action trigger on a keystroke, on a mouse click, when the page is shown, etc. So the first thing you have to set with your action is when it should fire. The second, most obviously, is what should happen. What should occur when that trigger goes off? Do you want to display a message? Do you want to launch a program, show an object, hide an object, cancel a test, etc.? You still have tons of great actions to work with in version 11 as you've had with previous versions. Next, you'll select your target. This is going to specify the target that's used by the action. Now, depending on what type of action you've selected, depends on what might be available for your targets. Targets can be chapters, sections, pages, tests, surveys, objects. If you use, let's say, the cancel test action, then obviously that target drop-down list is only going to include any assessments that you've got built within your course. So depending on the type of action you select, depends on the type of targets that are going to be generated for you. So just a quick overview. This gives you kind of a nice view of what actions now look like in version 11. Remember, the biggest change with version 11, aside from previous versions of Lectora, is that we have moved to that ribbon theme, that ribbon application. The first part of this demonstration, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the new action triggers that we've built within version 11. And what I think is going to be really useful to you is this new page show trigger. Now, for those of you that have worked in previous versions of Lectora, you can remember that any action you needed to trigger when the page was shown, you always had to create and place that action at the page level. If you had multiple actions that needed to be shown with the page, they all had to be organized at the page level. So in other words, you couldn't really organize these actions with their associated target objects. You always had to place them at the page level, which meant too, in terms of working with your Title Explorer, that page level always really had to be expanded out. You could never collapse those objects at the page level. So now we have a new action trigger called page show. So what this means is you can apply this action directly to the object that, let's say, you want to show with the page, and you don't have to place that action at the page level any longer. So let's show you an example of what I mean by that. If you take a look at the sample course, so I've got my beaches course. This is going to be our sample throughout today's presentation. Down on the bottom left-hand corner of the page, I'm displaying the current date. So those of you familiar with that variable current date, we can display it in a text block when the page is shown. So if you take a look, here's my Title Explorer, and I've got a text block, which is what you're seeing here, and here's the action that's not placed on the page level, but it's placed on the text block itself. So if we take a look, we've got our new action trigger in here. So we're simply saying, when the page is shown, let's change what's in that text block, which might just be a placeholder text, and let's actually replace it with this variable called current date. So this is how we're easily pulling in that current date as soon as the page is shown. There's no delay, it happens automatically. In previous versions of Lectora, we know if we wanted this change contents action to happen on when the page is shown, this action would be placed instead at the actual page level. So now we can better organize all of our objects because notice that text block in our Title Explorer can now be collapsed and expanded as needed. So it makes it much more accessible, much easier to access and organize that Title Explorer. So if we take a look, we'll go into our sample course here. So here's that same page within our sample title. And if I open up that page level, you can see here's my text block sitting right there on the page, and here's my simple action called set date. If we look up at the action ribbon up top, same action. So here's our new page show trigger. So when this page is shown, let's change the contents, that's the action we've chosen, and let's change what's currently in this text block and replace it with this variable called current date. Now this text block, this functionality, was just inserted in as part of our Smart Text object. So we've talked about that on previous Inspiration Wednesday sessions, but that functionality, when you insert the date, this is all it's doing for you. It's adding that text block and it's creating this action. But the reason it works automatically when the page is shown is because of this new page show trigger. So if you're someone who uses a lot of change contents and you want that action to occur when the page is shown, this is going to be a really nice feature for you to take advantage of. Now another feature change, or trigger change I should say, for version 11 is with our form objects. Now, when you add a form object, we're talking radio buttons, checkboxes, entry fields, drop-down lists, etc. An action can automatically be applied to the form object. When you add an action to this form object, it's automatically going to generate to this new onSelect/change trigger. The action will be viewable and accessible from the Title Explorer. So unlike previous versions of Lectora, you don't have to go digging within the action or the object's properties to find that. And the best part about this is because now you can just add actions to these form objects, you can add and associate multiple actions. You can have actions with conditions. So if you take a look at my example here, I've created a checkbox on the page and says check if you want additional information. When the learner immediately checks that box, I've triggered the following action. Notice the action, once it's associated with a form object, the trigger is automatically set to select/change. All I've set up here is that when the learner clicks that checkbox, let's show this QR code on the page. So it's a simple action, but it's a great way to have the learner associate with their interactions within the course. So let's take a look at this in our sample course. So if you take a look, on the page for you, I have a checkbox. To get this checkbox, I just went up to our Test and Survey ribbon, and I simply added the checkbox form element. Now, if I want to associate an action, I can go to the Insert ribbon, and I can choose my Add Action icon. The action is automatically applied to the object, so you can see in your Title Explorer it's automatically associated. And if you look up at the top within my Action ribbon, notice the trigger is automatically set to select/change. Here, you simply associate what you want to happen when the learner checks that box. So I'll choose a simple show action, and the object I'm looking to show is just this QR code on my page. Now, if I wanted this action to have a condition, I could certainly add a condition here. Then if I wanted an else action, I can take it even that much further. If you needed multiple actions to occur when the learner checks this box, all you have to do is continue adding actions onto the checkbox itself. Now, in previous versions of Lectora, you remember how this worked. If you added a checkbox to the page, you could go into the checkbox properties, there'd be that On Select Change tab, and you could associate one action with the object. So of course, if you needed multiple things to occur, you had to create an action group and then run that action group, etc., etc. So we've really simplified that whole process in terms of these form objects and associating actions with these form objects. So that's going to make things a lot easier for you if you're looking to just add a little bit more interaction and associate that with your learner's interaction within the course. So depending on what the learner's interacting with, entry fields, checkboxes, radio buttons, etc. In version 11, we've included a new object called our timer object. And if you associate an action to this timer object, automatically the action trigger is going to be set to done playing. Now the way this timer object works, you can set this up so that it's counting down, so that it's counting up, and when it gets to the end, whether it's counted all the way down or all the way up, you can trigger this done playing action. So if you take a look at some of the screenshots that I've got on the page for you, notice here's my Title Explorer, and I've added the timer object to my page level. The timer object can just be added from that insert ribbon. I've attached an action to the timer, and if you look below, you can see the action itself. As soon as you attach an action to the timer object, the trigger is automatically set to done playing for you. I've chosen the action to display a message, and here's the message that I'm looking to display. Now, I didn't set this timer up to be on auto start, so it didn't start counting down immediately when I got to the page because I wanted to talk about the object a little bit first. So if I click this button, this is going to start the timer, and when it counts all the way down to 0, this action that I've set up below is going to fire. So let's take a look at that. It's going to count down for 10 seconds, and then as soon as done playing triggers, so it's done playing, and it's going to trigger my action. Here's my action. I use that display message action, and this is the action, or the message rather, that I've typed in to my action field. So something to be aware of if you're using that new timer object. If you attach an action to it, you can easily do that. You can add one action, you can add multiple actions, but every action you add to that timer object is automatically going to be set with that done playing trigger. Now that we've spent a little bit of time talking about some of the new trigger options that you'll have in version 11, let's focus on some of the new actions that we've included. We're going to focus on 4 actions: go to web address, display page and pop-up, run JavaScript, and this open attachment. Now, in addition to including a couple new actions for version 11, if you take a look at my action drop-down list, I've starred off the ones that we are going to focus on. But if you take a look at this list, notice that no longer are all the actions just alphabetized in one big list, but rather we've broken this down into different categories. So actions concerning navigation, actions that you can apply to objects, commands that you can execute in Lectora, actions for documents, for media, for variables, etc. This is going to make it much easier for you to locate and utilize the functionality that you're looking for. So certainly if you really weren't sure of the name of an action, or you're kind of just looking through and kind of giving yourself some ideas of what type of functionality you can build into your titles, this is a great way to really expand and kind of break down the actions that are available to you. So let's first focus on this go to web address. You can use the go-to web address to display a web page in a new window. Now in previous versions of Lectora, if you remember, you had to select that go-to action. Then you had to specify your target as being a web address. Then you could set additional options to open the web address as its own window, in the same window, etc. Well, for version 11, we've sort of combined all of that functionality into one easy action. So if you take a look at my example, I'm asking my learners to click this recycle logo, and it's going to access some additional information. What I'm looking to do is display a web page, so go to that recycle.com, in a separate window. So the action that I've attached to this image can be seen below. So let's break this down and show you how we set this up. So here's our trigger. So we're saying when the user clicks this graphic, let's use this new action called go to web address. We've entered the web address here, but we still have those same edit options available to us. So anytime you see this little edit icon, means you can click to expand, and there's some more options available to you. So here, just like we could have done in the past, we can rename how we want the window name displayed. We can set our window style. Now this is something I want to make sure I go over today. In version 11, you've seen this new style called Lightbox, and in previous versions of Lectora, this was simply called Web 2.0. Same idea. The Lightbox is going to be that modern, that sleek look. It's going to gray out the content behind. It's going to focus on that pop-up window. The new browser window is what you would expect. It's just that typical separate window within your course content. And then you've got this Use Publish option. So certainly within your content, if you've got pop-up windows, you can set them to be that new browser type or the Lightbox style. The Lightbox is just that Web 2.0 style with a new name. If you choose to use the Publish option when you're publishing out your content, regardless how you're publishing, you can set the option in there. So you can have everything apply Lightbox or new browser window, or you can pick and choose as you develop your content. Same options still apply here. You can still resize the window to a custom size. You can change the screen position. And then, of course, you can set all of your HTML properties down below. So the nice thing here is you don't have to just use that go-to action like you've done in previous versions. Now you have this special go-to web address. So if I click, the way that I've set this up, I want this opening in a new window. When I click and launch that window, notice here I'm using that Lightbox style, so everything behind this window is a nice shade out in gray. It's modern, it's sleek, and this is just a website that I've chosen to display in its own separate window. I can close out of this content when I'm done, and I still remain in the same position within my course. So hopefully that doesn't get too lagged behind when we're using the GoToMeeting system. I'm just taking a look at the audience view there. It might have been a little bit slow on your end, but certainly does happen simultaneously for your learners. So that's the new go-to web address action. Let's move forward and discuss this display page and pop-up. Now, in previous versions of Lectora, we certainly could display a page from our title as a pop-up window, and we had a couple different ways to do it. You could use the go-to action and then set all these extra requirements up. You could have used the display message and chosen to display a custom message and then chosen a page, etc., etc. There really wasn't a straightforward response to this. So now, in version 11, you're going to have a new action called display page in pop-up. If we take a look here, here's our sample course again. And here, we're asking the learner to print their certificate of completion. So when they click on this button, we want to launch this certificate window. Now let's take a look at the action that we've programmed within that button. So we're saying certainly on mouse click, let's use this new action called page and pop-up, so display page and pop-up. The target, you simply select any page within your title, and automatically that page will be displayed as a pop-up. Whatever size you have that page set up within your title, it will display a pop-up as that size. So a nice, straightforward, easy way to display pages within your title as a pop-up window. Now if we go back to my sample course here, Let me go to the thank you page. So here's the page where we have this button. Click here to print your certificate of completion. Now, if I attach an action to the button, take a look up at the top ribbon. Right now, my text button properties are showing. And if you look all the way to the right of that ribbon, you have an Add Action button right in here. So like I said before, you don't always have to go to this Insert ribbon and choose the Add Action from here. A lot of times, if you're working with an object that you can apply an action to, the option will be available right within the object properties. So if I add an action to this button, my action ribbon displays up at the top. We'll definitely keep our action trigger on mouse click because the learner will be clicking this button. And now we can simply use this new action called display page and pop-up. It's asking for a target, and look what we have to choose from. Every single page that's built into our title we have access to. So if I choose the certificate page, it automatically will display that page as a separate window. I don't have to check anything else. I don't have to make any other modifications. It's just a very straightforward action. If I put this page in preview mode, we can enter my name, display my certificate, and it displays as that separate window. We've added another new action in Lectora version 11. This is our Run JavaScript action. With this new action, you can now quickly enter a JavaScript function and you can execute it when the title is published to the web. So in this example, we're going to trigger an action when the user clicks that refresh the page button. The JavaScript code that's generated can be used to refresh the page so it looks the way it did when the learner first entered. So if we take a look here, let's talk about first what the page is doing. Notice how the page looks now. The question is unanswered. The character is in this initial position. Well, the way we set up this page is we just added a true and false question, and we've created some immediate feedback on the page. This could be an exercise, this could be an interactivity that what if you wanted the learner just to start over from the beginning? You wanted to refresh that page out. So we've created this button here. You can see here's the button in my Title Explorer, and here's the action that we attach to the button. So the action is simply saying, when this button is clicked, let's utilize this new action called Run JavaScript. And here's my simple JavaScript code that I've entered in here. Now this is a code that you can take away from this session and use it within your courses. But any JavaScript code that you have, whether you've generated it yourself, whether you've gotten it from a website, etc., can be copied and pasted right in here. When I click the button, this is going to execute that JavaScript code, and it refreshes the page out so it looks just like it did when my user first got here. So that's a really great example of a JavaScript code that you could put into play as of tomorrow to refresh out your pages as the learner goes through. Let's talk a little bit about this new open attachment action. Now for those of you who've been working within Lectora, this new open attachment is really sort of replacing all that extra work you had to do when you added an additional file to Lectora. So now any additional files, when we say additional files, we mean things that are not natively supported by Lectora. A Word document, a PDF document, an Excel spreadsheet, etc. These are going to be referred to now as attachments, and this open attachment action is going to make it really easy to launch those additional files, to launch those additional resources within your title. In previous versions of Lectora, in order to execute this, you had to first determine how you were publishing out your content. Okay, well, if I'm publishing to single file executable or CD-ROM, I can use this action called launch program or document. But if I'm publishing out to the web or my learning management systems, then I had to use the go-to action, and my target was a web address. Then I had to make sure that I typed in the file name exactly as I added it, etc., etc. So there was a little bit of room for error in how you used to have to find these attachments and open them up. Well, now we have a very simple action for you, and I'll show it to you live in just a second. But if you take a look at my sample course, if I want the learner to click this PDF icon, okay, it launches a PDF document in a separate window, but here's how we got there. The action we're utilizing is just this open attachment option. The attachment will be any additional file that we've added to our program, that we've added to our title. Let me show you how this works live in our sample course. So if you take a look on my Jeffreys Bay page, I have a PDF icon, so here's a button that I've created. I want the learner to click this button to launch a PDF document in a separate window. But first, let me go ahead and add this document to my title. So just as we used to be able to, if you had additional resources, Word documents, PDF files, Excel spreadsheets, etc., you could just drag and drop them right to your title, same as you can now. You're still going to get this message. You've dropped one or more files whose types are not recognized. Would you like to add the files as an attachment? So now instead of it saying additional file, now we're just going to refer to it as an attachment. So I'll go ahead and select yes. Now as soon as it's added, we get into that same position where, okay, well, where is it? I don't see anything on my page. I don't see anything in my Title Explorer. Where is this file? How do I know it's in here? Well, one place you can always go to is your title resources, which is always available right here on the right-hand side. And you've got a category in here called your attachments. So here is the PDF document that I've just added. So here's my jbay_history. So any attachments that you add to your title automatically going to be shown here in the title resources. Now in previous versions of Lectora, you have to initiate how the learner is going to access that information. So let's attach an action to this button. We'll leave the trigger on mouse click. And let's choose this new action called Open Attachment. Now notice where I find this action. It's categorized under this Documents category. That makes sense, right? This is a document that I'm looking to open within my title. Now something I will point out to you, there is still an action called Launch a Program/Document. Some of you on the call are probably thinking, what could possibly be the difference? And the answer is there's really no difference. This Launch a Program document has been inherited in from previous versions. Okay, so it's just kind of an inheritance feature. So if you've been using that in previous titles, we've got it here for you as well. So I'm going to use Open Attachment. And here's where we get to see a nice benefit. Notice I have a drop-down now. Any attachment that you've added to your title is going to be listed right here for you. In previous versions of Lectora, if you were publishing out to the web, remember that action you had to do. Go to what? Go to a web address. And then in that web address field, you had to make sure you typed in this document name exactly as it was added to your title. If you made a spelling error, if you didn't type it in exactly, it wouldn't recognize it. So this makes things a lot more foolproof. You can simply select whatever attachment it is that you've added to your title. Now certainly if I put this in preview mode, we can click on the icon. It's going to bump me out of preview mode to launch that attachment, but you can see there is my PDF document. So that open attachment has really just simplified how you're going to access these additional resources within your content. All right, let's move away from some of those new actions that we've created in version 11, and I want to spend some time talking to you about this advanced edit dialog. Several actions that you can use now. Some of the actions being your change contents action, your display message action, modify variable action, etc. Some of these actions are now going to let you customize its properties by using something called this Advanced Edit dialog. This is going to make it much easier to customize and much easier to add variables within some of these actions. So let's take a look at what I mean here. I have a text block sitting on this page, and it says, thank you, comma, and then there's a name here, that's my name, and it says, for participating in this course. The way I want to set up this text block is when this page is shown, I want to be able to pull the learner's name from, let's say, their learning management system. However that learning management system has recognized their name, I want to actually pull it right into this text block. But unlike actions that I've used before where I'm literally just changing an entire text block with that variable information, I want to just embed the variable among other text. So thank you, comma, let's show this variable here, comma, for participating in this course. So how am I going to do that? Take a look at the action that I've used to get this done. So here I have this action triggering when the page is shown. I've got that change contents action. So I'm telling Lectora, let's change what's in this placeholder text. And let's use this value. Let's set the text to whatever I plug in here. Here's your Advanced Edit dialog. So anytime you see this little expansion icon, you can click on it, and it's going to give you this Advanced Edit dialog. Now, certainly, I can just type in text here, but really, why would you do that when you could just create a text block? If you don't have text that's dynamic, text that needs to change, or you're pulling different content in, then you're just going to create a text block. But look what I've done here. I began typing. I typed in thank you, comma, and then I inserted a variable right here into this text string. Now we know in Lectora, if you're referencing a variable, you're always going to write it in this format. Capital VAR, parentheses, and the variable name is contained within. But now in version 11, anytime you see this Advanced Edit dialog, take a look at the bottom left-hand corner of this window. There is a drop-down where you can select variables. I no longer have to remember what this variable name actually is. I can automatically just select it from here, and it's going to type it into that specific format. Then I can just continue typing out my text. So this text is going to be a little different than just straight text that's always visible in a text block on the page. Because now I'm saying, look, if I'm publishing this course out to my learning management system, where I see this, VAR AICC student name, that's going to actually pull in the student's name from that learning management system. So this is a great way, using this Advanced Edit dialog is a great way to really pull in and utilize some of these variables a little bit easier. So let me show you a couple examples of this in our sample course. And if I come back to this final page. So, okay, let's assume on this page level, I'm going to have a text block at the bottom, similar to what you just saw in my example. Thank you, pull in the name for participating in this course. First thing I can do is I'll go ahead and add a text block to the page. So from my insert ribbon, I'll just choose to add a text block. Now the text that I enter in here, this can just be placeholder text. So let me make this font white so we can actually see it. Placeholder text. So it doesn't really matter what I'm typing in there because I'm going to set a change contents action to this text block so that as soon as the page is shown, I'm going to pull in some different information. Now remember, because we have that new page show trigger, I can attach an action directly to this text block. So let me rename this text first, and I'll just call this text placeholder. I'll attach an action to the text block. I'll set the trigger to page show. So when the page is shown, what do I want to happen here? Well, I want to change the contents of this text block. So under the objects category, I can choose the action, change contents. Let's change the contents for that text block I renamed placeholder. And for my value, I'm going to go ahead and leave this as set text. Because I'm attaching this to a text block. Now, if I wanted to literally just display one whole variable in this text block and nothing else, you still have all those variables available here. So I still could just, if I just wanted to pull in that student name variable, I could select that here, but I want to do a little bit more than that. So I'll choose that set text, and then I don't have a whole lot of room to work here, so I'm going to expand out and open this advanced edit dialog just by clicking on this little expansion icon. So in my text here, I'll go ahead and say, thank you, comma. And now here's where I want to insert a variable. I certainly know that the name of this variable that I'm looking for is AICC underscore student name, etc. I don't really feel like typing that in. So anytime you have this advanced edit dialog available to you, and as I mentioned, it's not just change contents actions that you'll see this in. I'm going to go down to this variable dropdown, and I'm going to select the variable right from here. So I'll choose this AICC student name, plugs it in the format that I need, and then I can continue typing out the rest of my text. So thank you for participating in this course. So something pretty basic. So here's a great way for you to not only set a text block to just display a variable, because we all know how to do that. We just use that change contents action. But now, with this advanced edit dialog, if I needed to create a new variable on the fly, I could do that here, associate a random value. Anything you want to do can be done now here within this advanced edit dialog. Just briefly looked at a question, do I have to use the commas? Absolutely not. That's just how I want it to display. I want it to read as that text, that's all. So when I select OK, it updates here. Now certainly doesn't give you a whole lot of room to see that. That's why you can always expand that out. And remember what this action is doing. We're saying when this page is shown, let's change the contents of this text block, which, as we know, just says placeholder text, and let's replace it, let's set it with whatever we plugged in to that text field. Now certainly since I'm just working in Lectora and running from preview mode, I don't have this course published and running through my learning management system. If I put this in preview mode, you're not going to see my name, but you are going to see that it sets to everything else. So you see the space in between those commas, that's where it's going to pull in that variable, that AICC student name. Now those of you familiar with publishing out your content to your learning management systems, those AICC variables, they work for both AICC and SCORM related content, but that's information that's communicated to and from your learning management system. So if this course was published and I was running through it as a student in the LMS, I would get to this page and it's going to pull however my name is recognized in that system, it's going to pull it in right here. So that advanced edit dialog, you saw it here when we used our change contents action. You'll see it in other actions, your modify variable actions, etc. When you see this, open this out, expand this out, and it's going to give you a lot more opportunity to really customize that content. I think you'll really appreciate the variable insertion. If you're modifying a variable, let's say, and you're modifying it with the value of another one, you don't ever have to type in that capital VAR parentheses variable name again. You're going to see this insert option. So that advanced edit dialog going to be very useful to you. Again, you'll just see this expansion option in change contents action, display message action, modify variable actions, etc. So you'll see that a lot as you begin working within version 11. Now this is just a quick feature to cover, but I do want to make sure that you're aware of it. We have in version 11 a new modify variable. We have a new choice that you can set. So when you're using that modify variable action, your type, where you have chosen set equal to, add to variable, subtract from variable, etc., you can now choose set as empty from this type drop-down list. So if you have a variable that you need to literally empty out the contents of, you can just choose this set as empty. So just a nice new feature. It's something that kind of goes under the radar, so some of you may or may not have been aware that it was available to you. So now you'll have that option when you're working with that modify variable action. Now let's talk a little bit about this action pane. When you have multiple actions in Lectora, we know from working with previous versions, sometimes it's not always the easiest to kind of always look in that title explorer, see all these actions. Yes, I can see the sequence because it's top to bottom, it's linear, etc., etc. But sometimes you really just want a better visual of what the actions in your title are actually doing for you. So the action pane is now a dockable window that can provide you with this detailed visual view of all of your actions. So if we take a look, let me expand on this a little bit. Here's your action pane. I'll show you in our sample title in just a minute how you can access this action pane, a couple different ways. But your action pane provides a much better visual of the actions that you've got within your title. Now you can see here, these actions have all been set up on one page level. That's the example that I'm showing you here. Within the action pane, you have a number of different options available to you. First and foremost, you can just simply view your action details. You can see the name of the action. You can see how the action is being triggered, what the action is, what the target is, and if there's a condition associated with the action. If you need to reorder your actions, because remember, we know the way Lectora is going to trigger your actions. It's top to bottom in that title explorer. So if you need to reorder, you can drag and drop to reorder the actions right here in this pane, or you can use the down and up arrows to reorder as well. If you need to add another action, sometimes I find it easy just to keep this action pane up as I'm developing, because if I'm working on a page that's, let's say I have to create 7 actions at the page level, then this is a great way to do that. I can just add my actions right here. I can keep this whole visual view, and you'll see in just a moment, if I add another action here, automatically reflected at the top of my interface is going to be that new action ribbon. So I can continue just adding actions as I go. If you certainly need to delete an action for any reason, you'll come all the way over here to the right and you'll see this minus sign that will delete the action out for you as well. So I know for some of you, it might take a little getting used to that you do have access to this action pane, but I think you'll really appreciate its functionality in the sense that you're not restricted to that title explorer. Okay, so let me open up my sample title and you'll get a better feel for this. I'm going to go to the completion status page because I know there are several actions at the page level here. So this will give us a good example. So if you take a look at my title explorer, you can see at the page level I have a number of actions just right up here at the page level. Now, a couple different ways I can navigate within these. So before I actually get to the pane, let me show you some new features for version 11 as well. Obviously, as I'm clicking on each of these actions, notice up at the top, my action ribbon is automatically adjusting. So I click on the next action, it's showing that action properties. The next one, it's updating for each one. So navigating between each one, I can do as I'm doing right now and just keep selecting them from my title explorer. Or if you take a look on the left-hand side of this action ribbon up at the top, you can see that I've got these arrows right here where I've got 7 actions right now at the page level. So I can navigate from one to the other just by selecting this. So if you're really comfortable with working up here in this action ribbon, you don't have to leave it. You don't have to keep bouncing back down to select the next one in the title explorer. You can just use these arrows right here. Now how are we going to access our action pane if you want that visual? Well, any action that you're looking at up at the top here, when you've got your action ribbon opened, if you look all the way to the right, there's this little section here called Manage. And if you select Action Pane, it automatically, hopefully it's not, it looks like your end might be a little bit delayed from GoToMeeting, but it automatically will display this action pane down below within your interface. Now this action pane, this is a dockable window, so certainly if you're using dual monitors, you can reposition this window so it's always displayed, kind of like you can do with your title explorer. And if you take a look here, within this pane, as I select each of the actions in here, not only does it highlight the associated action in your title explorer, but it automatically updates to the action ribbon up at the top as well. Within the action pane, you can see your action name, your action trigger, what the action is, the target, and if there's a condition associated with it. Now I've got 7 actions here, but if I needed to add another action, I can choose this add action icon right here. All right, it puts the 8th action down at the bottom. You still have to go up to the top to your action ribbon to actually set the action properties, what the trigger is, what the action is, what the target is, etc. Any actions you need to delete from this pane, you can select this minus sign all the way to the right, and it will delete that action out of your pane. Now, a couple other things. If you're done with the action pane, you can always close its window. You can always reference it here within your action properties, or if you go to the view ribbon, you'll always have access to the action pane here as well. So a couple of different ways of accessing it as you're going through and developing your content. Now, a couple other things I want to mention about our actions and the way they've been set up within V11. Now, you can see here we've got our 3 main components. You've got your action trigger, you've got your actual action, you've got your associated target, etc. Well, conditions now, let's take a look at conditions. If you have a condition associated with your action, you can just hover your mouse over it, and you're going to see a nice little hover tip showing you exactly what that condition is. So we've tried to save you as many clicks as possible. If you don't need to open it, you don't have to. You can just hover over and see what conditions are associated. Now, if we take a look here, here's an action that has not only a condition, but then it has an else action associated with it. So you can see as soon as you plug in a condition, it adds this else piece for you. But if I click on this conditions, here's our conditions window. It looks similar to as it did in previous versions, but certainly it's not tied into that, that action properties as much. So here we can still select any condition can be true or all conditions must be true, etc. We plug in our variable, our relationship, our value. All of this is the same. However, what I do want to point out to you here, this particular action that I'm showing you, it's got to have a value of 1, but let's use our imaginations for a second. Let's assume that we wanted to refer to another variable in our course. Do we notice this guy? We recognize this little edit option. This will open up that advanced edit dialog we talked about a few minutes ago. Instead of this value 1, if you needed to reference a variable, any variable you have now within your course, you can pull in here. So that's what I was talking about. You'll find this advanced edit dialog in a lot of different places. When you notice that little expansion icon, that's going to give you that advanced edit dialog. So we kept it simple here. The value for this one is just if it contains 1. So that's the way this course was set up. So don't concern yourself too much about this specific functionality, just an example of a condition. All right, so you can certainly hover over your conditions now. As soon as you set a condition, you'll be able to plug in an else action. Any condition in Lectora you can apply, set your action, set your target, etc. So a lot of new changes in version 11 in terms of how actions work, how they look. The core functionality is still the same. You still have your 3 main components, your trigger, your action, your target, but there's a lot of better ways now I think you can work with actions. Don't forget that action pane. I think it provides a much easier visual than just having to always click over here in this title explorer. Kind of really gives you a better bird's eye view. If your functionality is not working the way you want, it might be a sequence error, and I think it's a lot easier to look at it here and determine that an action might be out of sequence than it is if you're just kind of focused in here on this title explorer. So we've certainly added some new action triggers. We've added some new actions in version 11. Advanced edit dialog, your action pane, some new modification options when you're using that modify variable action. So hopefully what this session has done is introduce you to things that you may or may not have been aware of in terms of what has been released with version 11. As with all of our Inspiration Wednesday sessions, this session has been recorded. In just a few days, it will be available on the website. So if you go out to our lectorau.com, This is an area of our website where you can access archived webinars, video tutorials, how-to courses, the community forum, etc.